The two main types of anxiety are trait and state anxiety. As said before, state anxiety is the anxiety that we feel in the moment and that changes due to changes in the situation. As anxiety can be either cognitive or somatic, this anxiety can be either cognitive or somatic. However, trait anxiety is the anxiety that we feel all the time. Trait anxiety suggests that we are born nervous and anxious and that we will always be anxious. So it is a constant nervousness. It can be described as a built-in proneness to worry, and someone with high levels of trait anxiety is more likely to be worried in all kinds of situations and often overreacts to these. They constantly feel threatened even when there is nothing threatening around, and then respond with a high state anxiety. It is also likely that Nick suffers from trait anxiety. We can tell this as Nick is nervous before games and always worries about his schoolwork, suggesting that he's nervous all the time. This trait anxiety may be another cause of his disastrous badminton games. One problem with this is that we cannot change trait anxiety. So Nick is always going to be anxious, so he cannot work on ways to reduce anxiety, but can work on ways to cope with his anxiety. He is also more likely to feel threatened even when there is nothing threatening there, and then he reacts with state anxiety. So in Nick's matches, he may see the opposition as a threat and become very anxious, causing him to play badly. This anxiety and distress are likely to be the main factors affecting his performance. The graph shown tells us how anxiety affects the quality of performance. We can see that at a low level of anxiety, the quality of performance in the cognitive state anxiety is high, suggesting that someone will perform better at lower levels of cognitive anxiety. However, we can also see that performance is highest with somatic state anxiety when there is a moderate level of anxiety. This tells us that Rachel may be successful in her netball matches due to her low levels of cognitive state anxiety or moderate levels of somatic state anxiety. The scenario would suggest that Rachel was suffering from very little to no anxiety, as she does not understand why Sarah is playing badly, suggesting she doesn't understand that Sarah feels anxious. This low level of anxiety may be why Rachel plays so well and why Sarah plays so badly. Lastly is competition anxiety, which is likely to be the most common anxiety in performers. This is where the performer perceives the sporting situations as potentially threatening. Hackford and Schwenkenmetzger in 1989 stated that competitive state anxiety usually follows patterns of tension and inadequacy combined with heightened arousal of the autonomic nervous system. This suggests that anxiety leads to tension, which increases the autonomic nervous system's arousal. Arousal is the readiness to perform, so increasing arousal may cause the players to perform better. However, too much arousal could also have a negative effect. Elite and average sports players may experience anxiety before and during a performance, and elite performers train to control their anxiety and stresses. It seems as though Sarah is suffering from competition anxiety, as in her competition state anxiety, as in her training and local games she performs well. However, in crunch games she underperforms. This may be as she perceives the spectators or the opposing teams as threats and believes that she cannot cope with the demands leading to an overall decrease of 86% success rate to 32%. Many factors can affect competition anxiety, including fear of failure, mistakes, bad performances, a fear of importance of the event, so how important do people think that the event is, fear of evaluation, fear of injury, lack of control, as they might be on an unfamiliar pitch, or they may be with some their competition may be really good, or there may be biased refereeing. Also, the individuals may evaluate the other players during the competition. So they may see the opposition as doing really well and then misjudge themselves. And there also may be aggressive or decisions of the spectators or referees that the performer may not agree with, which also may cause anxiety. And injury and fatigue, so if someone's injured, this can also have a negative effect and cause anxiety. And lastly, environmental influences like weather, time left, and what the score is. Nick's anxiety is likely to be triggered by many factors. For example, Nick may be evaluating the strength of his partner and comparing himself to the other player and feeling as though he's not good enough, meaning that the demands, he doesn't feel as though he can meet the demands. He also may be feeling anxious because of the result of his last game that he played, as he hasn't been playing well all term, and maybe judging himself off his past games. Lastly, he may misinterpret the performance of the game as being really important, as the coach keeps telling him he isn't doing well enough, and therefore puts more pressure on himself, which in turn will lead to more anxiety. In 1977, Martins et al. Developed the sports competition anxiety test. This is a self-reported test, and so where they collected results from the performers and then applied them to a sporting situation. This test helps us to get an understanding of a performer's state anxiety in a competition environment. They found that there were 4 factors that related to competition anxiety, including differences in how the performers interact with different situations, different types of anxiety that they have previously experienced, a specific anxiety trait only experienced in competitive situations, and the competition itself. The image shows us that competitive trait anxiety, which can be shown at a competition, and the competitive situation, for example, the match or the race, leads to a perception of threat, creating state anxiety, and deterioration of performance can become more extreme if the situation doesn't change. So if the competitive trait anxiety increases throughout the match or before the match, it can then lead to an increased perception of threat, which then increases the competitive state anxiety. Martins then went on to develop the competitive state anxiety inventory in 1990. This is another self-report which measures cognitive state anxiety, somatic state anxiety, and self-confidence. These reports were handed to performers several times prior to the performance, so a week before, a day before, 2 hours before, an hour before, at the start of the performance, and 1 hour into the performance. They're handed to the performers before in order to discover baseline levels and compare their pre-competition levels. You can see that cognitive anxiety, which is the blue line, is high a long time before the competition and steadily increases, but only slightly, up to the performance. You can then see that it splits into different categories, as different situations may make you more or less anxious. So success in the game may lead to a decrease, or if it's a 0-0, so nobody has scored or nobody has an advantage, the anxiety may decrease at the same rate it was since the start of the match. Or if the team is now losing, it may increase the anxiety. These may fluctuate throughout the whole game, so if they are doing really well and their anxiety decreases, and then all of a sudden the other team scores 7 goals, their anxiety may increase again. However, somatic state anxiety, which is a green line, is lower to begin with, as the body doesn't react yet, as the anxiety is not high enough. But then it will rapidly increase, but gently increases until right before the performance, and then it rapidly increases until the start of the performance. It is most likely to then decrease in a match because of the perception of threat. There tends to be 2 general patterns when looking at somatic and cognitive anxiety. Cognitive anxiety increases slowly leading up to competition and then remains high, but can fluctuate during the competition in relation to stress or failure. Somatic anxiety remains low until it rapidly rises just before the event and then decreases during competition. Han in 2002 proposed that each athlete possesses an optimal range of anxiety most beneficial for performance, and this zone is known as their optimal zones of function and is different for each person. Han in 2000 also found that some individuals can tolerate a wider range of anxiety intensity before experiencing a decline in performance, whereas others perform best only when anxiety lies within a very narrow range. So some people can tolerate high levels of anxiety, so their anxiety may be up here and may not negatively affect them. However, other people may have anxiety levels of about here, but it may negatively affect them. So the individual has different levels of anxiety that affect them. This suggests that some people can cope with higher values of intensity than others. For example, Rachel may have anxiety before a performance, but she does better at coping with it than Sarah, who struggles to cope. Although too much anxiety can negatively affect a performance, if it is within the zones of function. Although too much anxiety can negatively affect performance, however, if it is within the zones of function, it will have positive effects. In conclusion, anxiety is often considered the most important psychological factor to influence sports performance, which was stated by Han in 2000.